A world in silence. Imagine waking up to a world where the satellites that once tracked deadly storms have gone dark, where the systems that monitored rising sea levels have fallen silent, where the very institutions that warned us about the climate crisis no longer exist. This isn't a movie plot. This is what could happen if the US government continues to defund climate and energy research. It's a quiet decision with thunderous consequences, one that affects not just one country, but the entire planet. Let's talk about what's really happening and why it matters more than most people realize. A quiet proposal with loud consequences. Earlier this year, a federal budget proposal emerged from the US administration that sent shockwaves through the scientific world. The proposal called for deep funding cuts to some of the most critical climate research institutions on Earth, NOAA and NASA's Earth science programs. These aren't minor tweaks, these are major amputations. Programs worth billions slashed, staff that track environmental threats laid off, and data systems built over decades on the verge of collapse. To the average citizen, this may sound like just another line item in a complex federal budget. But to climate scientists, emergency responders, and leaders across the globe, it feels like the world's most powerful nation is closing its eyes in the middle of a burning house. Let's understand what these institutions do. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, isn't just a weather service. It's the front line of America's defense against natural disasters. It tracks hurricanes, wildfires, droughts, floods, and changes in ocean currents. It warns communities before disaster strikes and gives farmers data to grow our food efficiently. And NASA? It's not just about space. Through its Earth Science Division, NASA operates satellites that monitor the health of our planet in real time, tracking greenhouse gases, forest loss, ice melting in the poles, and much more. These systems are the eyes in the sky, giving us the truth about what's happening on Earth, without bias, without spin. Now, imagine losing access to that. Imagine governments, aid organizations, and even military operations trying to make decisions blindly. The repercussions of losing such capabilities are vast and chilling. It's not just about the US suffering the consequences. It's about the entire world facing a diminished capacity to understand and respond to environmental crises in real time. Without those satellites, we are stepping into a fog of uncertainty. Why this isn't just a US problem. But here's where it becomes even more alarming. This isn't just an American issue. Over 50% of the world's climate data comes from US government agencies. From Kenya to the Philippines, from Bangladesh to Brazil, millions of lives depend on that information. For example, weather systems in Southeast Asia rely on NOAA's satellite data to prepare for typhoon season. African nations use US climate data to predict and mitigate droughts, which are vital for their survival and food security. The US data supports models that help humanitarian organizations better allocate resources in disaster-stricken areas. In fact, more than 80% of international climate research relies directly on US-gathered data. Weather forecasts, disaster preparedness systems, global carbon tracking, it all starts with US-funded programs. When America cuts its science, the whole world suffers. Global collaboration on climate-related challenges, from reducing emissions to adapting to more extreme weather, is directly tied to the wealth of data generated by these US agencies. And this isn't just a small issue. Climate change is accelerating, making global access to reliable data even more critical. The economics behind the cuts. Why? Well, some say it's about money. Supporters of the budget cuts claim they're trying to reduce government waste and trim unnecessary expenses. But let's look at the numbers. NOAA's entire annual budget is around $6 billion. NASA's Earth Science program gets less than $2 billion. To put that in perspective, the US military receives over $850 billion a year. and fossil fuel companies receive over $20 billion annually in subsidies. So why are we cutting the programs that cost pennies by comparison, but are essential to survival? The irony is hard to miss. In an era where we're facing devastating hurricanes, unpredictable wildfires, and rising sea levels, the US government is cutting the very systems that help us predict, understand, and respond to these threats. The truth is, this might not be just about money. This might be about politics. Because the data gathered by NOAA and NASA leaves no room for denial. It shows, without a doubt, that human activity is driving climate change. The global trust erosion. There's another consequence we don't talk about enough: trust. For decades, the United States has led the world in environmental data and scientific transparency. Countries across the globe depended on American systems not just because they were advanced, but because they were accessible and reliable. The world trusted the US because its satellites flew higher, its models were more accurate, and its commitment to science seemed unwavering. But as funding cuts take hold, that trust is beginning to fracture. Now, countries like China, India, and the European Union are trying to build their own climate monitoring programs, but they can't match what the US has already built over decades. It would take billions, decades, and massive coordination to replace what the US has developed, and by then, the damage might already be done. That vacuum creates a dangerous space for misinformation. Without credible data, countries may turn to their own sources of information, which can lead to fragmented and unreliable data. In this information void, climate denial, corporate interests, and political manipulation will thrive. And in the absence of strong US leadership, the global effort to tackle climate change loses direction and focus. International climate agreements could collapse, and nations may begin to prioritize short-term economic interests over long-term environmental stewardship. The response: scientists and citizens pushing back. But not everyone is staying silent. The scientific community is fighting back. After the proposed budget cuts, researchers organized protests, petitions, and open letters. Even retired NASA officials and top generals warned Congress. Cutting climate research isn't just irresponsible, it's a threat to national security. In response, some universities and nonprofits began crowdfunding to keep basic research alive. Others turned to international collaborations. A few tech companies even offered satellite data to researchers. But here's the problem. You can't replace a national infrastructure with scattered efforts. You can't crowdsource a global emergency response system. Climate change doesn't wait for politics. It doesn't pause while we figure things out. It accelerates, day by day. And in the absence of coordinated data, we lose the very thing that makes us resilient: foresight. Without coordinated global climate data, societies are left scrambling, trying to piece together a response to problems that demand immediate action.